Hope you've had all a good week, and we'll be talking about anxiety this morning. And the definition of anxiety is at 9 a.m. on Sabbath morning is when your computer freezes with your sermon there, and you're wondering whether your sermon will still be there, and you're trying everything to retrieve it. So by about 10 o'clock, we managed to find something. So we're okay. So, but anyway, just as an announcement, we still have our study, Journey from the Head to the Heart, so that will be continuing on Monday night and at 5:30. So anyway, we look forward to seeing you there. We'll be looking at Acts chapter 16. And so if you have a look at Acts chapter 16, we'll enjoy exploring that together. So as I said this morning, we'll be looking at exploring anxiety. There's some good anxiety and there's some not so good anxiety. But let's have a wee look at some good anxiety. This is what greets people at a roller coaster ride, which looks like this in Ohio. Now, at the time that this was built in April 2003, it was the fastest one. See the smiles on their faces, and it stands at around about 123 metres tall, and it travels at 193 kilometres an hour. So you can imagine your face peeling back. But as I said, you know, it's only the fourth fastest now, but this is what it looks like. Now that is one big arch, isn't it? That's huge, you know, and this is what it looks like at the top. Now that looks impressive, doesn't it? So when you get to the top there, you can imagine the anxiety that is building up and the anticipation, and what worries people is that if you get stuck on top, you know, and you're just looking down there, and you're just going, 193 kilometres an hour. And when you enjoy a roller coaster ride like that, and the smile wears off, that's what happened to her. And you know, that's what can happen with anxiety. But you can't blame her though, can you? I remember on the Gold Coast for 7, we went on the corkscrew one 7 times in a row. I absolutely loved them. Not so much now, anyway. Yeah, somehow age has a thing. But that kind of anxiety is a good anxiety. It's an anticipation, it's an enjoyment, it is a pleasure to have that kind of anxiety. Now there's a different kind of anxiety that we're just going to have a look at. William Tyndale, who wrote the Bible into English. He wrote it in 1525. Now, William Tyndale, who at the time the printing press had been around for about since 1440, and he had this great desire to print the Bible. And this was a time when he did his Bachelor of Arts degree, then he went on to do his Master's degree. Once he was able to do his master's degree, he was able then to do theology. Here's the irony. To do theology, they weren't allowed to look at the Bible. I don't get that, but he didn't get that either, and he complained about that bitterly. He made application to the bishop and to the cardinal to be able to translate these scriptures into English. And he was lucky not to be charged. To hold a Bible at that time was tantamount to a death sentence. It's crazy, isn't it? A death sentence to hold the Bible. Anyway, he managed to curry a bit of favour at one point with Henry VIII when he said that he wrote a book and said that the king should be the head of state instead of the church in Rome. And Henry, being full of his own ego, said, "That is a good idea. I like that, man." However, he fell out of favour when he said, "No, I don't," when Tyndale said, "You marrying Catherine of Aragon, no, you did the wrong thing." So anyway, he had to flee England after he said that he wanted to translate the scriptures into English, and he fled to Antwerp and he translated the New Testament, and there are thousands and thousands of copies that were smuggled into England. The Bishop of London bought around about 6,000 copies and burnt the whole lot. But that enabled them to purchase more Bibles. That was the ironic thing because of the money that was generated. So it didn't quite work, you know. You were a snookered pal. And so then Tyndale wanted to translate the Old Testament, and that he was able to do. Unfortunately, he was betrayed and arrested, and Thomas More and the other authorities ganged up against him. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. When he was walking out, because he was an established theologian, they said, "We will not burn you at the stake. We'll just choke you to death. Then we'll burn you." So, okay, you've got to be thankful for small mercies, I suppose. When he got to the stake there, or as he was walking, he saw the place where he would be executed. When he got there, his last words were that he would pray that King Henry VIII's eyes would be opened. Just interestingly on that, in 2 years' time, his prayer was answered because Henry VIII then allowed the free distribution of the Bible in English, and that was able to then go out through England, and so his prayer was answered. But I just want you to track for a moment. Tyndale, devout Christian, incredible brain on him, truly a scholar, about to lose his life. Walking out, seeing the stake on which he will be bound to, he will then be choked, then burned. You could imagine anxiety, could you not? But yet his final prayer was for Henry VIII that his eyes would be open. How was Tyndale able to face a situation like that and his last words be for his king, both in both sense, Henry VIII and for his Lord? How could he possibly do that? And yet people like myself get anxious about my computer freezing at 9 a.m. You know what I'm saying? How could Tyndale possibly do that? As we're going to be looking at Psalm chapter 3, and you know, I know that for each of us, some suffer anxiety more than others, and I just want to look at, from a biblical perspective, on ways that we can do it. I don't want to go down the track, and I don't subscribe to the idea of you've got to have more faith, brother, not to take medication or anything like that. I don't believe in that. If you take medication for it, fine, that works. But for us as everyday Christians and Seventh-day Adventists, we have to understand how anxiety can debilitate us and can either debilitate us or help us. Now, before we just look at Psalm chapter 3, let's just have a wee look at some Archibald Hart, who wrote a book called Anxiety Cure. He says, a fear is a reaction to a specific danger. So fear and anxiety can be synonymous, to which an individual can make a specific judgment. But what characterises anxiety is the feeling of diffuseness and uncertainty and experience. So look, take for instance, when I was in Rome once, I was crossing a road and it was about 8 lanes, and I looked, no one coming. And I walked out onto the road. I forgot to look this way, which was where the traffic was coming from, because they drove on the wrong side of the road, as you know. And I just momentarily forgot, so I had a wall of motorbikes coming toward me. So fear kicks in, and it's specific. You run across the road, you get across the road, and you go, just got away with that. But the other kind of fear and anxiety is, say, after the event, that fear still grips, and constantly having to think about it, dwell on it, it tends to paralyse. I'll just come back to that one in a tick. So there is, as you know, a dramatic rise in anxiety. That one thing about all this is hard to ignore is that it seems to have gotten worse. Rates overall of anxiety have increased dramatically during the last 50 years. The most striking increase was between 52 and 67, but the numbers have continued to rise. In fact, the average childhood today, this is fascinating, the average childhood today exhibits the same level of anxiety as the average psychiatric patient in the 1950s. Now, that's a pretty bold statement that Leahy says, but with the onset of the internet, this all centres on the core of much of the anxiety that people experience today centres on the lack of connectedness, and the internet, Facebook and that have atomised relationships, and so the threat of death being the most common symbol of anxiety. However, most of us in our civilised era aren't constantly threatened with death. The great bulk of anxiety comes when some value we hold essential to our existence as selves is threatened. Okay, so what is essential to you today? As you sit here today, if that was removed from you, what would that be like for you? Job, position, title, status. If that was removed, what would that do to you? Possessions, etc. Since the dominant values for most people in our society have been liked, accepted or approved of, much anxiety in our day comes from the threat of not being liked, being lonely or ostracised. And you can get the obvious link there with social media, Facebook, TikTok, all those sorts of things. And that lack of connectedness and the threat of not being liked or being lonely or the fear of missing out causes enormous amount of anxiety, and so there's been a dramatic rise in anxiety, since the 2000s. So, May also adds that a person who feels threatened, but as though by a ghost, in this state people often remark that they feel as though that they were in a daze. Anxiety tends to destroy our consciousness of ourselves. It disorients us, wipes us out temporarily. Our clear knowledge of what and who we are blurs our view of reality around us. This bewilderment as it who we are and what we should do is the most painful thing about anxiety. So there's two areas of anxiety: crossing the road, you made it, fear, react, it's very specific. But the kind of anxiety a lot of people experience today is when they're in their private time and it causes, because of a situation of fear, it's diffuse. You don't know quite what it is. You don't know why you're feeling anxious. But the key thing is that it causes paralysis in people. They don't know what to do, how to react, and what to do next. So, how did William Tyndale deal with the anxiety of facing death. Now, most of us don't have to face death. How did he have to deal with it? How did David deal with his anxiety? Psalm chapter 3. Let's have a look at Psalm 3. So Psalm chapter 3, it says at the top of my, this was a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom. Now, so let's just read a couple of the verses and to get a bit of a flavour of what he's saying. So in verse 1, O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, my lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his hill. Okay, so David was in deep distress. This was a time when he had Absalom had usurped David from the throne. He was on the throne. David now was running from the armies. Now, why was he running from the armies? What had David done up to this point? Well, this was around about the time when he did that dastardly deed with Bathsheba. Uriah killed him. People knew about it, found out about it, lost credibility. And now Absalom is in charge. Now, let's just spell this out a little bit more. For David, no credibility. They looked up to him as a king. Before Bathsheba, they looked up to him because you remember, with David and Goliath, David kills tens of thousands and Saul only thousands and thousands. And of course, that started that jealousy tirade from Saul. And so the people looked up to David. They looked up to him as a king. David blew all that. He blew all his credibility. He committed the ultimate sin with Bathsheba as well as murdering the husband in order to try and cover it up. And people said, we don't want a king like this. We don't trust a man like this. And so he had lost his credibility, his kudos, and his position. And now he's fleeing the armies and trying to preserve his life. What is he going to do? Anxiety kicks in here. How does he cope through that? Does he wallow in self-pity? Does he now start to look in the self-justification mode? What does he do? Now, he could, the debilitating fear and anxiety is not specific, it's diffuse. Often we don't know why it's there. Leads to a deeper fear, the paralysis. This is what could have gripped David. That kind of anxiety, the sense of nervousness, agitation, the worry, the ulcers, and one can literally be eaten away from inside. That was the other option for David. Now, what I want to suggest to you that David gives us some very good advice, because for Seventh-day Adventist Christians, if we are to continue to be good, faithful Adventists, we have to be able to rise above the complexities of life, the anxieties that hit us, grip us, and we don't want to get to the point where it paralyses us. So how did David do it? All right, let's have a wee look here. Let's go back to verse 1. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. So this is the armies of Absalom that was trying to seek to kill and to destroy him. And he was hiding in a cave. Where's my food? Where's my peace? Where's my sleep? And many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him. Isn't that a terrible thing? People are saying, you are lost. Why? Because of what he had done. Bathsheba, etc., etc. And it's also reminiscent of what happened with Saul. You remember with Saul, how he had that promising start, and then God said to him, he said, look, when you go and invade the Amalekites, I want you to kill all the sheep and oxen. Why? Why would you do that? Just seems such a waste. Well, God actually didn't give an explanation. He just said, that's what I want you to do. And Saul decided to think for himself and said, you know what? I won't kill them all because that is just simply a waste. Simply a waste. I will use them for the sacrifices. So I don't have to use mine, of course. And that act of disobedience, God said to him, the kingdom will be removed from you. And Samuel never saw Saul again after that. So Saul lost his salvation and things just went from bad to worse. You can read the story in 1 Samuel chapter 15 to 17. And so that would be coming to mind for David. There is no salvation for you. Oh. There's a rise in anxiety, isn't it? No salvation. What am I going to do? How am I going to react? What am I going to say? Are they right? Do I buy into it? Paralysis? Or what else? That's the scene. Let's go to the next verse, which I think's looks like verse 3. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. Excuse me. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered from me from his holy hill. Now, what are the two key words here? He is my what? He is my shield. And what's the other key? Well, it's a little bit of a phrase here. The lifter of my head. All right, so he's the shield. All right, okay, so you know what shields were like back then. You know, they sort of had the little shield here that they'll stop you from getting stabbed and that sort of thing. I'd imagine that they're pretty heavy, even those ones. But they also, some of your versions will say, my one doesn't say it quite like this, some of your versions that you're reading, your shield is around me. All right, so your version says that, doesn't it? Yeah. All right, so your shield is around me. So there's another shield that they had, that they would go and that they would go to a castle and it would be used for a siege. You know, when you go up to a castle and you have these big shields here, you know, about 6 feet high, that sort of thing, and you go up there, and when you come to a large wall, what they tend to do is to discourage you from going in. They might sort of tip down hot boiling water or tar, lava, or anything that's hot or burning or something like that, you know, to take away the welcome mat. All right? So you're not welcome here. These large shields formed a large barrier around them. And so David says that you are a shield around me. This is the big shield that protects. Now, what's the significance of this? Now, as Seventh-day Adventist Christians today, we want to be propelled painlessly through, anxiety-free, of any issue or struggle that we have today. David doesn't say, look, get me out of here. God says, no, go somewhere where you can get a little bit of peace and quiet. He's still there. You are a shield around me in the midst of danger and struggles. God does not propel us painlessly through these struggles. But he does promise that he will be a shield around us in that time of trouble. Now, he then says, what's that second one? He is the lifter of my head. Now, what did I say what had happened before? Oh, David, you evil, disgusting person. Look at what you did. You did that to Bathsheba. You did that to Uriah. You have no credibility. You have no salvation. And his head's down. His head's down. You know when someone's done something wrong, their head is down, they feel, and they walk with their head down. What does he say here? You are what? You are the lifter of my head. How could God do that to David? How could God be the lifter of David's head when he'd done something so awful? That's the good news of the gospel, isn't it? That's the good news of forgiveness. Staggering, isn't it? How could God forgive David for such evil? Yet in the decades in the church that I've been in the church, sometimes we have difficulty forgiving people who've done stuff like that. How could God be the lifter of his head? Well, something happened beforehand in Psalm 51. I just want you for a tick. I'll have a wee look at Psalm 51. And, you know, if you just read verse 10, this was David's prayer. And he says to him, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit in me. And so his desire, and if you read the other 9 verses, culminate to this, create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit within me. And then he goes down here, O Lord, open my lips and my mouth will declare your praise, for you will not delight in sacrifice or would give it. Or you will not be pleased with burnt offerings. The sacrifice of God is a broken spirit and a broken and a contrite heart. And so even though David, who was dethroned, he was fleeing Absalom's army. He was stripped of his kingship, his power, his status. He had lost everything. What was his foundation of his identity? It could have been his kingship. It could have been his status, his position. And anxiety is often caused by us wanting to preserve all of those things. Do you understand what I'm saying here? So for David, he was stripped of all of that. What did he have left? What did he have left? The only thing he had left is his relationship with God. But what God wanted was a broken and a contrite heart. That was the key for David. And so in order for him to rise above the situation with his head downcast, where God's, but you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. For that to happen, he had to have a broken and contrite spirit. He had to be able to look to God and not to look at the earthly things of what had given him his identity. For many today, the identity is found in career, position, status, what I do, what I have, and what people say I am. They are the things that motivate and drive people. And when they are threatened, that's when anxiety rises. When I am not like what people think of me, what people say I am. That's when anxiety rises. And when we are taken out of the family unit and deposited into social media, where we hope that people in cyberspace will like me, then we're in trouble. Because that is about as fickle as wind here in Hobart in winter. All right, so anyway, he says here, I cried, so my glory and the lifter of my head. This says so much about the God that we worship, that even for David, he was able to lift his head and say, I am proud of you. You can walk around and be proud. Wow. Why? Because God has saved him and forgiven him and restored him within that relationship with him. So, okay. So, he looks up, looks to God, and then verse 5, he says here, I lay down and slept. I woke again, and the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of the many thousands of people you have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, and save me, O God. In the midst of anxiety, we've got to look up. When we look up, we've got to see the substitute. Too often we look to me to be able to solve all the issues. Anxiety, when it comes to fright or flight, we react to a dangerous situation, that anxiety is okay. When we are faced with paralysis, we must look up. You know, Jesus himself was anxious when facing the cross in the Garden of Gethsemane in his prayer. When he asked Peter and the three disciples to stay awake, and Peter slept through all that. But Jesus was anxious at that time. He looked up to his Father. And his Father assured him. His Father was his shield around him. But he did not hold back in allowing Jesus to go to the cross. He didn't say to him, I'll propel you painlessly through that. No, he still went through. Jesus also looked up. We look up, and also the substitute. Now, David would have also been mindful of the substitute, though he didn't know what we know, but he would have been aware of that story in Genesis 15. I took a sermon on that last year. And he would have been aware that Abraham himself was afraid and concerned about whether that promise would be fulfilled or not. And so in Genesis 15, he gives this unique picture of how contracts were signed back then. Contracts were not signed with just a little bit of wax and a stamp or with a signature by a lawyer. It was a unique process that we would find totally revolting. But they got all these different animals and chopped their heads off and made the participant of the contract to walk through the pieces. And what that symbolised is that if you broke your treaty with your neighbour or with another nation, this is what will happen to you. Your head will be chopped off. So when they walked through the pieces, and the pieces were the animals with that included birds and rams, they had their heads chopped off and they had to walk through. And so when you had a king or whoever that will walk through the pieces, what the other party is saying, if you break this treaty, see that animal there with the head chopped off? That's what will happen to you. Oh, okay, I'll be a good lad. So you've got a real incentive. Let's bring back the good old days. Yeah, there's some merit in that. Now, when you're walking through the pieces here, God gave a completely different picture to Abraham. He gave a familiar picture of how contracts were signed, but there was a theophany that happened whereby God himself would walk through the pieces. And even though the covenant gets broken, and if the covenant gets broken and you do things wrong, I will pay the penalty. Wow, there's another picture of the gospel in the Old Testament, that God himself will pay that penalty. And so David, in his distress of losing his status, power, anxiety, he looked up, sees the substitute, remembers what had happened to Abraham. Isn't that terrific news? So in the midst of the struggle that he was going through, he clung to the promises and to the stories of the Bible on what he knew and understood. And during the Sabbath school lesson today, you're talking about the last days and as to how Adventists will walk through that. Psalm 3, God is our shield, is he not? Isn't he? Is he going to propel us painlessly through that? Absolutely not. We will be persecuted. Tyndale wrote the Bible in English for us and paid the ultimate price that we have today. In the school district of 8,000 students in Utah, they banned the Bible in the school. There was such a hue and cry recently that they had to reverse it. There are moves afoot today to ban the Bible. In some libraries and schools in Canada, they have banned books prior to 2008. And so when you go into the library in the school, you won't find any books prior to 2008. Books are not used a lot today. Would that be right, wouldn't it? I think Dr. Google is the method for anything. But the point being was that any books prior to 2008 were banned or destroyed. We are gradually losing our freedoms. And that should be very concerning when in the Middle Ages, when to hold a Bible, you faced the death penalty. Now today, if you quote the Bible, you risk being cancelled. And livelihoods have been destroyed over that. Banning the Bible, banning the books, things are strangely going back to how they were. So for Adventists, as we traverse weekly and daily life, the things that we form our identity, is our job. That's very important to blokes. What I do is extremely important. Because that's about the first question we ask, isn't it? Or second, what's your name? What do you do? I'm a dustman. Oh, okay. I'll go to the next person, thanks. And when I was at school, a dustman was considered the lowliest of jobs because they would go around and pick up the tin and tip it in the back of the truck. And I remember one day in the foyer of a church there, that no exaggeration, the wealthiest man in town was a member of the local church. He was welcomed with red carpet and literally like this, come. That's what the head elder did, sort of like that. And then he turned around and goes, oh, hello, so-and-so. And you just go, what's the go? Status, money, relationships, all these things help form our identity. If they were taken away, would our life as we know collapse as such into a heap? It is normal to feel anxious about losing a job or losing a house or going bankrupt. It's normal feeling that. But if the paralysis and depression seeps into the point whereby we can no longer function, then we need to look at the Psalm of David. And we need to look up, know that God is our shield all around us. We are not to flee necessarily trouble, but He is there with us to protect us. And also know that He is our substitute. And God, who is proud of His people that He has redeemed. In Revelation, it gives that picture that God is so delighted with His redeemed that He has, as Revelation hints at, has that ongoing banquet for eternity. He is so proud, delighted, happy with His redeemed, which is you and I here. Isn't that terrific news? So we can lift up our head, knowing that He is our shield, our Redeemer, and because Jesus rose from the dead, and because of that, our salvation is assured. David had to go through enormous anxiety. He was restored back onto his throne. God was his shield. He looked up and he saw the substitute.